Support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
Well, Republicans may be celebrating a GOP sweep in the midterm elections, but everyone is cheering the end of malevolent political ads. Election year noise is finally over, and back again to the business and the public dialogue at hand. Welcome back to the most widely watched source of Carolina business and public policy. I'm Chris William, and without drama and with their leadership fortified, will the GOP in charge meaningfully change direction? How does the arc of debates like education, immigration, tax reform readjust? We'll begin to dive into this post-election landscape finally with Thad Woodard of the North Carolina Bankers Association, Gregg Robinson from Orangeburg Economic Development, and later on, he's coming back, South Carolina ports boss Jim Newsome.
Major funding also by Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. This edition of Carolina Business Review was recorded November 7th, 2014. On this week's program, Gregg Robinson of the Orangeburg County Development Commission and Thad Woodard from the North Carolina Bankers Association, and special guest Jim Newsome, CEO of the South Carolina Ports Authority. Now, here's Chris William.
Welcome to our program, Gregg. Good to have you back. Thad, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Chris.
Glad we could get you here. It
Thank
took us
you,
24 years, but
no, not that long.
better late than never. So here we are, post-election. Republicans firmly in control in South Carolina, like that was ever a debate. In North Carolina, again, like that was ever a debate. Thad, looking back now and looking forward, what would you tell Republicans to do maybe differently, maybe focus on that they haven't focused on? What should Republicans in North Carolina consider now for the next couple of years?
Well, Republicans in North Carolina are united, and I think they're enthusiastic, thrilled with the results of the elections. But now the delegates that they've sent to Washington are going to have to find a way to work together. The same thing they've been talking about over the last number of years of not being able to work with the Democrats. I believe that politics is a circus, a great big tent. And I want the giraffes and the hippopotami and all the different animals of whatever stripe under that same tent. If Mitch McConnell has to meet with the president every single day over lunch, they ought to be working toward that. But they're going to have elements within the Republican Party that are going to be different from mainstream. They're going to have to corral that first, but they have a great opportunity to do some things in a relatively short period of time because they'll be getting back to campaigning again before we know it.
Probably next week, actually,
Yes.
It begins. Gregg, South Carolina is not really sending anyone new from a senior political leadership standpoint of South Carolina. What should they do differently? Same question.
You know, I agree it is a circus, but you know, as far as the ringmaster needs to be about infrastructure. You got to focus on the road improvements, bridges, coming out of the port specifically. If we're going to recruit the international investment that we have been able to secure, you have to have the infrastructure to get the logistics in place.
Specifically for you, and you probably didn't know this one was coming, but you know, Nikki Haley's secret weapon, Governor Haley's secret weapon has been Bobby Hitt. He's been there for 4 years. He's done a lot of great things. Number one, will the Secretary of Commerce stay for another 4 years? Number two, if he doesn't stay, how punitive is that to Governor Haley in doing a lot of the things that she's been able to get done in the last 4 years?
Now, that's a great question, and I truly think that Bobby is on board as long as we see the growth, the excitement of the manufacturing presence, the excitement of South Carolina, and the ability to win. I think Bobby's on board for a little bit longer. Clearly, he has retired one time. However, I really do think that this is an opportunity for him to really kind of solidify his legacy as far as with the port growth, the ability for us to really win that next big project. And as you well know, it's highly competitive and the stakes are very high among the Southeast.
Thad, we talk about manufacturing, we talk about transportation, we talk about a lot of these things that take financing. Post-2008, now that we've had 5 years of a growing economy and we seem to be doing pretty well, you look at the jobless numbers or the job numbers and they've come back pretty nicely. 9 months of consistent over 200,000 job growth nationally. When it comes to banking and finance, though, I mean, this is your sweet spot. This is something you know about. And in a state as progressive with banking as North Carolina has been, what do you worry about?
I'm worried about, in a positive way, being able to handle all the change that's going to come to this state. I truly believe that Raleigh is going to be a bigger city than Charlotte in the next 20 years. I think we're going to have massive growth. But with that as a problem, we're growing in urban fashion. If you go east of I-95 in North Carolina, it's a pretty tough area. There's nothing there. Bringing about balance to our state, Western North Carolina needs a lot of aid. I think there's a lot we can learn from South Carolina. We haven't had the stability in some of the leadership positions that they've been blessed to have. And we've got to be able to create relationships, follow through like they have in South Carolina, maybe do some collaborative things together. Our infrastructure needs great attention. I'd like to have that $111 million that was spent on the Senate campaign to put into something like making our ports or our highways better. We've got a lot of challenges, but we've got great people who will come to grips with it.
And specifically for North Carolina, Chad, and I know you know this well, Thad, I know you know this well, is there have not been any new bank charters. Does that mean that we've got consolidation ahead of us and no new blood in the system?
Chris, we have been in a consolidation mode for quite some time now. At one point, we had 206 savings and loans in North Carolina alone. That industry is pretty much by the board. But now we're down to about 100 financial institutions that make up the North Carolina Bankers Association. And we have outside venture capitalists who've invested in banks. They are trying to merge with other institutions, and the FDIC, the federal regulators, are not approving any more charters. Probably today it would take at least $50 million in capital for a new bank, another $50 million to be technologically prepared to open your doors and be competitive. And then where are you going to find in this litigious society 10, 12 directors to sit on that board? It's a real challenge. So we're headed toward bigger and bigger institutions.
In South Carolina, Gregg, I know you know this well. I mean, none of these questions are surprising to either one of you, but South Carolina ratified, if you will, about $500 million last year for transportation needs. That's a drop in the bucket, and especially if Congress does not go through and fund the new transportation plan. How much at risk places like Orangeburg or just in general transportation infrastructure in the state of South Carolina, how much is that at risk if Congress does not fund what clearly needs to be a priority?
Well, it's a critical issue related to rural North Carolina as well as South Carolina. We have to fundamentally get back to the infrastructure element.
What happens to announcements like Boeing?
Yeah.
When they're looking to expand, or others the same size, same kind of elephant hunts, are those going to be less and less if you can't get this thing fixed?
Yeah, it will be. And right now we are, I mean, when you kind of look at the entire U.S., I mean, South Carolina ranks in the top 5 as far as per capita road, as far as the interstate mileage. And we have got to have the bridges, we have to have the widening. You can be the greatest port in the world, but if you can't get the product out and through and to, it doesn't matter. And they recognize that.
You know, we keep talking about the ports, and we're going to have the ports boss on here in
Yes.
just a second. Thank you, gentlemen. Please stay with us. Speaking of transportation, next week on this program, her name is Kelly Platt. She was here a few years ago when she first took the reins, if you will, at Thomas Built Buses out of the Triad in North Carolina. She will be back. And then in 2 weeks, the relatively new chancellor up in the mountains of North Carolina at Appalachian State. Dr. Sherry Everts will be here. It has been widely accepted that in North Carolina and in South Carolina, the single most important driver of development, both commercially and culturally, is Charlotte Douglas International Airport. So given that rationale, doesn't it make sense that the Charleston port can also be a dynamic and important part of the globally competitive landscape? And especially since the Carolinas are net exporters of goods and services. Joining us now and again is the South Carolina Ports Authority Chief Executive Officer, Jim Newsome. Jim, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Chris. It's always good to be here.
Well, first of all, Jim, congratulations on some pretty spectacular year-over-year growth in containers in Charleston. When you, let me couch, not but anything, but let me couch that in that now Republicans are still in control in South Carolina and in the nation. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? Does it make it easier or harder for you going forward to get done what you need to get done?
I think it's good to have the stability that we have in leadership in South Carolina. We've got a very strong team in the state government, both legislature and our governor, who's very pro-business, and our congressional delegation has been very supportive. So I think continuity is good. Mm-hmm. It enables us to move forward in a positive way because we've got a lot to do.
Is there a lot of a DNA and policy change that you have to effect to, not just to catch up to Savannah or some of the other global ports, but get done what you need to get done, like the deepening, rather?
Well, I think the realization is there that these sorts of projects have to move faster. They have to be thorough, but they have to move faster. So I think that is ingrained in the nation's mindset today. So we just need to move forward in a purposeful way and make sure that we get funded to do our deepening.
Okay.
Well, I'd like to know, since this is a Carolinas television program,
Thank you.
business program, what, Jim, might we do together collaboratively with our ports? You've got a great port facility. We've got two that need some help. How might we be able to do things that would help both the Carolinas through the ports?
Well, I think there's a lot of potential there. You've got a great new leader in Paul Koza in Wilmington. We share a common logistics infrastructure, and I think that we need to have a discussion about how to leverage our logistics infrastructure for the benefit of both states and for the benefit of both ports. We're the deepwater port for the Carolinas. I mean, that's the future. Wilmington and Morehead City have a lot to offer, and I think there's some things that we can do together that make a lot of sense.
What would that be? A specific, I'm sorry.
You know, how do we link the container flows between our ports? Maybe a container barge between ports to support the flow of commerce, because we are going to face a shortage of truckers to move containers in the future. So we got to be more creative in how we move cargo. Leveraging the Charlotte Douglas Airport, the Norfolk Southern intermodal ramp there. Ideas like we had in Greer's are another potential in the 95 corridor, things of that nature. So we ought to think about collaborating, you know, in terms of logistics, you know, making sure the logistics infrastructure is used well.
I think what you just said is headline news in Columbia, Raleigh, and Charlotte. That's very welcomed.
I mean, we compete in economic development terms, that's clear, but you know, logistics-wise, if you look at the map, we share a common footprint in terms of highway, railroads, and things of that nature. We're both fairly small states. We need to get the most out of that.
No question about it. And Jim, congratulations on your credit rating with Moody's just recently. That's a big deal. You know, if I were to say, if you had a magic wand now that November's passed, when we look at the road infrastructure and some of the things, what would be the number one thing that you would like to accomplish in this next 2 to 4 years?
Well, I mean, as far as our port, we've got to get our deepening done in timely fashion. We've got to get Phase 1 of the Navy base completed by the end of this decade and get the intermodal container transfer facility done. We also need to build out infrastructure to handle discretionary cargo. We're going to move a lot of grain and plastics over our port because exports is the dominant theme. So we've got to make sure the private sector infrastructure keeps up. And the roads have to be addressed. I mean, I-26 is the main artery in and out of our port. and it needs improvement. And I think that is on everyone's radar screen now, and I'm optimistic that there'll be a solution to that in this next 2 to 4 years.
A couple of big dynamics going on in the economy, Jim, is the cost of oil, and it's been dropping. Jobs, so let's do 2 or 3 things. Cost of oil and jobs, how does that impact how you do pro forma growth for the ports going forward?
Well, the fact that we can be self-sufficient in terms of energy is a game changer for our country, because we're going to manufacture a lot of plastics and things of that nature that previous to that event we're going to move overseas. So although exports have been in a bit of a rut the last 2 or 3 months, we think the dominant theme going forward is export growth. And it's export growth of plastics, of ag products, and it's the resurgence of manufacturing with exporting in mind. So that really gives us the confidence to invest in new facilities and to compete for business, basically.
You keep talking about the bigger ships, and your whole background is in shipping, international shipping. Can you make the everyday viewer understand what we're looking at as far as super carriers are concerned?
So we are building, the industry is building massive ships between 8 and 18,000 TEU. The biggest ship that can go through the Panama Canal is 5,000 TEU. So these ships are unprecedented in size. They have 48 feet of draft fully loaded. So we're building a 52-foot harbor to handle those ships without tidal restriction. And that gives us the deepest harbor on the East Coast and the biggest exporting region on the East Coast. So it's a game changer for our port, and it's a game changer for our region. You know, it's not just for our state, it's for the entire region that we get a benefit out of that, because ships need to come and go with reliability and speed. And our harbor deepening will allow that to happen.
Yeah, and global logistics is the key. The Carolinas, as far as the ability for us to export more than we're importing, is a fundamental game changer for all of us. And I would ask of you, I would think that as we kind of fundamentally get our infrastructure in place and get prepared as far as the certified sites in the Carolinas for that next big project. But, you know, looking at the Port of Charleston as an export opportunity versus that import, because we always think about the imports.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the baby boomers are not increasing consumption.
Yeah.
I mean, we're actually deconsuming, if that's a word. So manufacturing is the growth theme. And back to Chris's point, I mean, manufacturing creates good jobs. Those are the jobs from the Industrial Revolution that we became dependent on for rising standard of living. So it's a good time to be in the Southeast because we are manufacturing again. If you look at the great work done by BMW and Michelin and Boeing in our state, that shows you what potential is there. And we think there are a lot more projects that will happen because there's a lot of reshoring of manufacturing, and that will benefit the ports in terms of export. Because most of this manufacturing today has global business and exporting in mind. So we've just got to be prepared to answer the bell when the time comes.
You know, what has the gravitational pull of Boeing? How has that changed the way that you do business, the way you've kind of modeled out where you're going, but how has it changed the way people in the low country are thinking about building around that infrastructure?
Well, I mean, Boeing is transformational, as BMW and Michelin have been in the upstate. If you get a company like Boeing, it not only, you know, fosters job growth, it helps healthcare, it helps education, because these sophisticated companies demand great services. So Boeing is a multi-generational benefit for the low country, as BMW and Michelin have been in the upstate. You just cannot, you know, overemphasize the importance of that type of mega company coming into this region.
What's the statistic I saw recently about one manufacturing job? Was that you?
Yeah,
that creates what was
five.
that?
At least five. Yeah.
That was pretty eye-opening.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we say that the port is indirectly responsible for 1 in 11 jobs in South Carolina. That's a very powerful statistic.
It really is.
Companies locate near ports today, and that's because they are in global business. They want to minimize inland costs. They want to increase supply chain reliability, and that's really what we're about doing, is making our port the most reliable it can be to support the growth of this region. And we're in the best region in the country to be in the port business, basically.
Correct. You know, when we bring in international companies, it's interesting. An hour from the Port of Charleston, 2 hours from the Port of Charleston is Charleston. I mean, when you really think about the global logistics and the ability for us to deliver product to market, our port of Charleston is the Carolinas port, and it is a significant player as far as aerospace, automotive, and advanced manufacturing, especially advanced materials. Aerospace is going to continue to be the #1 growth market for the Lowcountry in the foreseeable future. And I commend you guys on your ability to deliver the product as far as the deep water access, because again, it makes us more competitive against Norfolk. But my question back to you, Jim, is if we were to say, okay, aerospace, automotive, advanced materials, what would you think is kind of the core of what your growth strategy over the next 5 years outside of the deepening?
Well, I would say it certainly has been most recently automotive, the booming investments, automotive and tires, the investments by BMW and Michelin, Bridgestone, Continental, Jitty Tire in our region, which drives raw material importing and drives exporting. I would also say the growth of what we call discretionary cargo, which are ag products. I mean, we are the provider of food to the world. That's not going to change anytime soon.
Yeah.
And plastics now are becoming a manufacturing theme in this country. And a lot of that stuff's not made in the Southeast, but it's going to be exported through our ports because we have the capacity. So our real role in that is to make sure we can invest, that we're ready, and that we're responsive to the big ships and to these developments in manufacturing. An example of that was building the inland port in Greer. I mean, we had an opportunity to leverage short-haul rail for the benefit of the companies in that area. We grabbed it quickly, and it's met all of our expectations. So we got to be on our toes and have a good vision for what's coming next.
You know, to follow up on something that Thad said, he inferred that if we could drop some of these state political boundaries a little bit and figure out where we could work together. Are you happy with the connectivity that the ports have with Charlotte Douglas? That would seem like tethering those two would be a really tough duo to beat. And what could we do better there?
Well, we are the natural port for Charlotte. We've been very excited about the intermodal facility at the Charlotte Douglas Airport. The business community in Charlotte has been very, very active in engaging us about, what did we do in Greer? How can we make that work in Charlotte? So I think everyone's got that idea. How do we make a logistics tie between certain parts of North Carolina and our port? So I think that's in motion right now. We can just further try to develop that idea.
And collaboratively, as Charlotte continues to grow, as Raleigh explodes, to be able to work together, the two Carolinas, with a wonderful port in Charleston, and collaboratively with Morehead City and Wilmington.
Yeah, I mean, again, my focus is on logistics infrastructure. That's what I'm talking about there. But we have a good logistics infrastructure in the Carolinas. We need to leverage it and develop this, work on the strengths of the respective ports. We're not in bulk cargo. We're not in the wood pellet business. Right. They do a good job in North Carolina in that. Let's see how we can make that work for our joint benefit.
Yeah, we're running out of time, but I want to say quickly, Export-Import Bank every 2 years comes up in Congress and at risk of losing it. How important would it to get some kind of permanent solution for an XM Bank, as it's called?
Well, it's very important. I mean, a lot of these companies such as Boeing and GE on the gas turbines do a significant share of their business with Export-Import Bank financing, and the bank makes money. So that needs to be positively resolved in our view, and it would have a negative impact if it's not.
Is it fair to say that even the large producers, as you said, GE, Siemens, BMW, Boeing, would a substantial part of that business be at risk if XM Bank was not renewed?
Well, I don't think it would affect BMW per se, but I'm not the expert on that, but I do believe it would have a significant impact. I mean, they rely on the Export-Import Bank today. The Export-Import Bank works well. I think that's the major point. Yeah. It makes money. Yeah. And it's a success story. Why change it?
Jim, thank you for being on the program again. And congratulations on a great year and hopefully a great 2015.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, good. Nice to see you. Gregg, welcome. Good to see you. Thad, I don't even know where to start, but I want to thank you for your service to North Carolina over these last 37 years almost. Recently named to the Raleigh Hall of Fame. to the Junior Achievement Nobel, not Nobel, but you are a business laureate for North Carolina in the Business Hall of Fame. I mean, these are not small achievements, and I don't want to let it go without acknowledging that. So thank you very much, and thank you for being on this program.
Chris, it's a pleasure, and I'm honored by these things. But I'm getting older. And
Older, not
about
old.
That. Yes,
but
that's
older.
right. That's
okay.
right.
Thank you, and it's not the last time we're going to see you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you again. Thank you for joining us. Until next week, I hope all your business and that your weekend's good, too. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care, when and where you need it. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.